Well, that was awkward and happened without anybody looking or realizing it, and very little attention from the mainstream media. The U.S. debt, the national debt, has passed the $20 trillion mark. Now, being this is one of the main themes of the Junius Maltby channel, by the way, welcome to the Junius Maltby channel, we have to address it and discuss this number, the $20 trillion. 20 trillion, look at those numbers, $20 trillion U.S. national debt. This is a screenshot of the U.S. debt clock that I took this morning while preparing this video for all of you. Okay, before we get into the main article regarding this recent news, we have to backtrack a little bit and go to the Visual Capitalist and look at their $20 trillion of U.S. debt visualized using stacks of $100 bills. I'm not going to do the entire video as I've done it in the past. You can go back and see that whole journey and that video there. But we're going to have to review what are these numbers, these billions, these trillions, because our little minds kind of lose track of it. So let's take one moment before we really discuss this new landmark debt level and realize what it looks like and what it translates into. This is crazy. Consider the seconds as currency. 1,000,000 seconds is 12 days. 1 billion seconds, 32 years. 1 trillion seconds, 1 trillion seconds, 32,000 years. That means converted into seconds, the national debt in dollars would equal 640,000 years. 640,000 years, ladies and gentlemen. Just going back in time 1 trillion seconds would put you at 10,000 years before the first cave wall paintings in France. It would predate all of written history and the building of the pyramids. Okay, enough with the time analogy. Here's $100 million on just a pallet. See that pallet right there? That's $100 million. The couch that the woman is sitting on, that's just a stacks of bills that equals around $46.7 million. So there is a pallet of $100 million in US cash. Here, $1 billion. Now every bill you see here is a $100 note. That is $1 billion. Here is 1 trillion US dollars. And now 20 trillion. There's the Statue of Liberty surrounded by stacks towering above her. That, my friends, is $20 trillion, the level of debt which we have now reached. This is a historic moment, the U.S. government passing the $20 trillion debt mark for the first time ever. Let's take a look at what this means and historically what has happened to empires, nations, people groups that have suffered under debt. Bear with me as we read some of the article here. For the first time in its history, the U.S. federal government has more than $20 trillion in outstanding debt. The milestone was technically hit Friday, with the Treasury Department settling its accounts at the end of the day with $20 trillion, 162,176,797,904 of debt outstanding. Of that debt, the Treasury said 14 trillion and change is held by the public, while 5 trillion and change is held by various parts of the government, also known as intragovernmental holdings. The real story behind America's new $20 trillion debt, this is from Simon Black. Late yesterday afternoon, the federal government of the United States announced that the national debt had finally breached the inevitable $20 trillion mark. This was a long time coming. It should have happened back in March, except that a new debt ceiling was put in place, freezing the national debt. For the last 6 months, it was essentially illegal for the government to increase the debt. This is pretty brutal for Uncle Sam. The U.S. government hasn't run a budget surplus in 2 decades. They depend on debt in order to keep everything running. The real story isn't the number or the size of the debt itself, it's the trend, and it's not good. Year after year after year, the U.S. government spends far more money than it collects in tax revenue. According to the Treasury Department's own figures, the government's budget deficit for the first 10 months of the fiscal year i.e. October 2016 through July 2017, was $566 billion. That's larger than the entire GDP of Argentina. Since the government has to borrow the difference, all of this overspending ultimately translates into a higher national debt. Make no mistake, debt is an absolute killer. History is full of examples of once dominant civilizations crumbling under the weight of their rapidly expanding debt, from the Ottoman Empire to the French monarchy in the 1700s. And as you all are familiar with, we have done videos on numerous historical incidents of debt destroying nations. You can go back in the archives of this channel and explore those on your own time. Here's the problem. The national debt is growing much faster than the U.S. economy. In fiscal year 2016, for example, the debt grew by 7.84%. Yet, even when including the benefits of inflation, the U.S. economy only grew by 2.4% over the same period. In other words, the debt is growing over 3 times faster than the economy. This is the opposite of what needs to be happening. What's even more disturbing is that this pedestrian economic growth is happening at a time of record low interest rates. Look, it's great to be optimistic and hope for the best, but this problem isn't going away, and it would be ludicrous to continue believing this massive debt is consequence-free. There's no reason to panic or be an alarmist, but it's clearly time for rational people to consider this obvious data and start thinking of a plan B, what I've been saying for a long time. Now let's continue this discussion and real quick review legal tender money versus fiat. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with these terms as you've been part of this channel for some time. We've reviewed and taken the journey many times on this channel following the course of government debasement of currency and the creation of unbacked fiat currencies. And we've looked at this coin here, the Lydian coins from some of the earliest periods in human history when precious metals were incorporated into a monetary unit of exchange. This is considered the first debasement of coinage due to wartime expenditures. If you look here, Lydia, Croesus, Stater, this coin here, 18 millimeters, 10.7 grams. Okay, that was the weight of precious metals. And now if you look to the right there, 8.08 grams. Just put that up there to show that there really is nothing new under the sun. Governments going back to the beginning of time have been debasing currency in order to fund their expenditures. We've covered Rome numerous times on this channel. We've looked at their coinage, we've discussed it, we've seen the disruption in trade and what happened to the empire as they watered down and diluted the purity of their coinage. Here you can see the collapse of the Roman silver monetary system. This is a very interesting chart. Silver denarius basis, 280 BC to 518 AD. Now you look there, you can see the almost stable currency there in the beginning. And then it just, look at that waterfall event, the decline and fall of the Roman denarius based on silver content. You can even see a time where there was no silver coins minted anywhere. And as the dilution of the denarius took place, the empire's trade and ability to compensate people for goods and services and to facilitate trade, the trust in the coinage itself was worn down, and it was almost like an inflationary event. People hoarded coinage. That's why you find pots, clay pots, full of Roman coinage throughout the ancient world. It was essentially bank runs. People were hoarding away their coinage, especially coinage that was made of more pure and precious metals. Eventually, as you know, again, you can go watch the videos we've done on the Roman Empire, but the economy collapsed, trade was disrupted, and of course there were other factors and things that took place, outside invaders and such, but the Roman Empire collapsed and fell. Now, an interesting side note into that period in Roman history when they collapsed and fell were the political gangs on the streets that were fighting, the welfare warfare state, perpetual warfare being waged around the corners of the empire, and then the entitlement, the welfare, the bread and circuses, the entertainment funded by the state, and the food just given out for free, and people relying on the state for their subsistence. There are some interesting parallels to our modern state here in America. One could argue that we have a Category 5 economic hurricane heading our way. Now, these are all slides of bank runs over the course of history and in different parts of the world even. I grabbed some from America, some from other parts of the world, Asia, Europe, and eventually there comes a point where everyone realizes what's happening and makes a run for it. They make a run for the fire exits. Now, whether or not they want to pull their cash out because they want to go buy food or gold and silver or tools or whatever just to have the cash, that's not the point. The point is eventually people get, I hate to use the term, triggered, and then they go for it. They all rush there together, long lines are formed, and there's, of course, chaos and disruption, bank holidays, and an economy thrust into turmoil. Now, it's up to you and I to hopefully see the signs of these things much sooner than these particular days, than when this occurs. You want to be, hopefully, one of the first people to the fire exit in a building that's burning down and get out. And then maybe you can help people and assist rescue for others. Recently, we covered some news touching on moves China is making towards basically moving away from trading in the US dollar. And if you look at the US dollar, you've seen that over time, its purchasing power has been destroyed by mass inflation, manipulation of interest rates, and government meddling. Its ability to purchase gold has crashed and deteriorated over the last century, and the value or the purchasing power of gold has been maintained. We've covered the history of the US economy and the major landmarks that have led to the destruction of the dollar. And as the debt increases, more and more drastic measures will be taken. And I'm sure that the purchasing power of the dollar, its strength, will continue to be destroyed, eroded, and deteriorated, if not entirely replaced as a currency at some point by some other means. But we know one thing for certain. Throughout this entire span, going back all the way to that first coin you saw, the Lydian coin, the stater, all the way to now, gold and silver have maintained value, preserved wealth and purchasing power, preserved dynasties, and maintained families throughout the span of history, century by century, through wars, through famine, through changes in government. Go back and look at the video of just the history of the currency changes in Eastern Europe that we covered, and look how precious metals would have preserved the wealth of individuals during those times. Thank you for being part of the Genius Maltby channel today. Thank you for your consideration, your conversations here, and I appreciate each and every one of you who continues to support and participate in this channel and what we are doing and what we are trying to do as far as spreading a message of preserving wealth and protecting one another in the economic times that are to come. Thank you.